All right, welcome everybody to our Tuesday night meeting. Would anybody wish to address the board before we adjourn to closed session? Seeing no one, we shall adjourn to closed session after Michelle talks to us. Welcome, Michelle.
Good evening, President Frias, members of the board, Dr. Washer. As you go into closed session tonight, you do have administrative appointments on the agenda. Leah continues to respectfully ask that the association president and/or an alternative designated by the association be included on administrative interview committees. As you discuss this placement in closed session, I remind you that our voice continues to be silenced. We were told a year ago that it was due to COVID and confidentiality and security. We respectfully ask that a union representative, the president, who has been the designee for as long as anyone can remember, has been included in that procedure. If they cannot attend, then they designate a union representative to attend. That in part has been the process for as long as I have knowledge of being a union rep. We feel that this unilateral change is another example of disrespect towards the association, and it has silenced our voice. We would please request that you consider reinstating the policy that has been past practice. Thank you.
Very good, thank you, Michelle. Anyone wish to address the board? Seeing no one, we shall adjourn to closed session. Thank you. We're missing.
Maybe we can be a little more attentive, and I think we get better response as well. Yeah, it's challenging.
Oh, he's been here. Oh, yeah. He was very
Long drive from Oakland.
That's easier.
I picked up his grandkids. Hi everyone, welcome to our June 22nd meeting. We'll go ahead and we're reconvening our regular meeting. Roll call, we have all board members are present, and let's go with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Neely, would you mind leading us in the pledge, please?
Raise the flag, salute, and pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Neely.
Very good, thank you, Mr. Neely. Like I said, all board members are present. We're joined, as always, by our wonderful helpers. We have the Executive Assistant of the Board, Ms. Michelle Armstrong. Welcome, thank you very much. And our IT tech extraordinaire is Michael, and he's doing a bang-up job and we're keeping him quite busy. So thank you, Michael. And monitoring our social media and making sure it's all out there is Chelsea Bunker. So thank you very much, all three of you, for being here tonight. We have no student reps here tonight because it is summer break, and we are back in summer school, but we are glad to have you all here, and we look forward to getting tonight's meeting done. So moving on, a report from closed session, and I think I gave all the closed session agendas to Mrs. Armstrong. Thank you, Chelsea. Mr. Nava motion, and Vice President McFarland second, and the board approved the appointment of Edward Gierke as elementary vice principal effective the school year 2021-22 with a location to be determined by the vote of 7-0. In student matters, Mr. Nava motion and Mr. Forrest second, and the board approved the settlement agreement of OAH case number 2021-04-0890 by the vote of 7-0. And that was all we had to report from closed session. Moving on, we have our superintendent's report. Dr. Washer.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Have a couple pictures for you. This is going to be of Adventist Health, Lodi Memorial Hospital, donating over 100 new computer keyboards to our district. Yeah, that's a wow. They've done this in the past. So thank you very much to Adventist Health, Lodi Memorial Hospital. The keyboards will be sent to school sites and available for staff and students to use. This is the second donation this year of keyboards, and we thank the community partners for this, and also want to thank Ms. Valerie McPhee for doing the pickup and bringing them over. So thank you for that service, and we thank you for that donation. Want to let you know that also there's a new Food Max in town, and they have made a donation to Leroy Nichols Elementary and Orchard Elementary. Each received $1,000 from Food Max. So thank you very much to Food Max. Also, I just want to let you know, I know that you've all been watching the quickly changing and revised regulations and rules regarding the health pandemic procedures and protocols. We know that there have been changes regarding masks and social distancing, testing and other procedures. A lot of that is for vaccinated individuals only and not applying to school sites. So we are in the process of revising our procedures and protocols to reflect those new revisions. We'll get something out in communication to our staff and community soon. At this point, we haven't made an official change, but we will be working on that very shortly. Places that are not school sites will have less restrictions than our school site facilities in terms of masks for fully vaccinated individuals and social distancing for fully vaccinated individuals. So that will be coming soon to reflect the change that school guidance will be changing in the near future as well. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you, Dr.
Oh,
Wash.
I'm sorry, I have one more thing to share. I know that you
You
mentioned...
already said thank you.
But this is a good one. I know that you mentioned the graduations last time, the in-person graduations, but you rarely get thanked for things, and I want to make sure that you know that at the McNair in-person graduation, there were several students who thanked the board for making it possible as they walked past you up to the stage and as you were leaving shouting from their place in the audience. So McNair students, we appreciate you thanking our board.
Very nice. Thank you, Adventist Health, and all of our community sponsors. Thank you, Food Max. That's a great report on the vaccinations. We're really excited about that. And McNair. What? Whose area is that in? McNair?
Mr. President?
You know what? I think you're right. So Area 6. What's in there? I don't have a favorite school, obviously, but if I did, McNair would be pretty high up there in my list of favorite schools. And vaccinations. You know who else doesn't recognize California's vaccinations? The state of Hawaii. They only are recognizing vaccines that take place in their own state. So, yes.
Oh, not backward. Yes.
It-
They're part of the United States. They are?
So yeah, so my granddaughter, to get her here, they ignore my vaccination. So yeah, very, very interesting. And of course, not only do you have to be vaccinated, you have to be fully vaccinated and have your 15 days run. So it could be. It could be. It might be. Anyway, very nice report, Dr. Washer. Thank you for that information. Moving on, we have comments from the public. A 20-minute time period has been set aside for the public to address the board on items not listed on the agenda. Each public speaker shall limit his or her comment to 3 minutes. The board cannot engage in dialogue about public comments because of restrictions placed by the California Brown Act. Ms. Armstrong, do we have anyone who wishes to speak to us?
Yes, we have one, and excuse me if the handwriting, but I believe it's Janine Balzuda. Did I say that correctly?
Janine Bosseldua.
But thank you.
Janine Balsadua. Is that closer? No?
My name is Janine Bosseldua.
Welcome,
Thank
Janine.
you. Good evening, President Freitas, members of the board, Dr. Washer. My name is Janine Bosseldua, Chapter 77 member. I've been a 20-plus year employee of the district.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And transportation negotiator. I've heard that the board would like to hear exactly why employees are here to speak, and I will be exact. Our lower wages. Your valued employees, and especially employees that have been here long-term, you have a lot of long-term employees here that have been here for years. They love their jobs. But many of your employees are overwhelmed, overworked, due to the enormous amount of vacancies in the district in their related field. More work has been added. In these COVID times, since COVID, I've come to know numerous employees in different work sites when transportation was shut down. Transportation employees were spread out at different work sites that needed help. I've heard their complaints of the low wage. Their complaints, I feel, are valid. Our pay is not even in the comparables with other surrounding districts. Many need 2 jobs to make ends meet. Us employees do not feel valued by the district with such low pay offered. Ask yourself, why so many vacancies? Transportation, I feel since I have been here, has had record-breaking vacancies in drivers, bus attendants, mechanics. Mechanics can't even keep up with what their workload is. And we've got some awesome mechanics. This school year, we've had to cancel bus service. That's unheard of. It broke my heart, and I was deeply saddened that I couldn't go by and pick up some of the kids that didn't have rides. Leaving some of my students behind, it broke my heart. Rumor has it, there are many looking for other employment with comparable pay. Bus attendants losing their former 7.5 hours down to 6. Bus drivers losing their 11-month down to 10. Mechanics down to 3, needing twice that amount. They can't keep up with the repairs. You have valuable employees. I love my job, and there's many, many of us that love our jobs. You have valued employees. Please show us our value. Please don't allow rumors of employees seeking other employment to become a reality. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Janine. Any other members of the public wish to address the board? Okay. Thank you for those comments, and let's move on with tonight's agenda. Janine, also do.
I just spoke.
She can't speak. She can't spell it. Anyway. Okay, we have consent agenda A. We have 3 items on it for routine business. Does any member of the board wish to pull any of the items on consent agenda A?
A2.
Mr. Porter wishes to pull A2. Anybody else? And does any member for the public wish any items to be pulled? Seeing none, what are
Mr.
the wishes of
Chairman, I
the
move
board?
we approve the rest of routine agenda A.
Thank you, Mr. Nava, for your motion, and thank you, Vice President McFarland, for your second. We will go ahead and call for the vote on routine business items A1 and A3. And routine business consent agenda A passes 7-0. Mr. Porter, you pulled item A2?
Yes. Could you pull that up for me, please? And then could we take a look at these? I'm sorry, I thought this was the contract one. Did we already approve this?
It is.
It's a contract.
I think you're on the
I'm on
A1.
the wrong one. A1? Yeah, I'm on the okay, that's good. My screen doesn't show that. No, I can do that. I do have some issues. Many issues. 3, I don't have A2. Anyway, I just have a couple of questions. I guess this is general from Mr. Hahn. I believe that these are the new contracts for the up and coming year, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and I sent you some emails today, and also Dr. Washer got back to me as well. And then I did a little bit of a deep dive into some of this. In 2011, Mr. Neely and Mr. Heberly formed a task force to look at attorney fees. And they formed a subcommittee, I believe, along with Ruth Davis, because the attorney fees were getting out of hand. I believe at that time, based on the article that I read, we're spending $61 per student in legal fees. That was in 2011. I'm just curious, did anything become of that committee that, Mr. Neal, I believe you were president at that time in 2011, that you and Mr. Heberly put together, before I make my next comment?
We took a look at having an in-house attorney for several reasons. And we did not approach it. We did not approach it from having an in-house attorney cover all of the different sources.
Right.
What we looked at specifically was having an in-house attorney that would manage all of the other attorney contracts that we had, and maybe take care of some of the basic kind of things.
Right.
And it seems like it was a lot lower at that time. Do you remember?
It was $1.9 million.
Yeah, it seemed to be like it was lower at the time.
Total.
What's that?
That was total.
Yeah, yeah. And what it came to is, I still believe that we should have an in-house attorney. I just don't think that we had enough people that were on with that. And also, one of the big expenses we had at the time were negotiations.
You're in RIF too.
Yeah. So that was one of the big things that we had. And as that went away, then the impetus to have the in-house attorney kind of went down as well.
Yeah.
But I think now, I think you're on to something. I like that idea.
Well, I would like to preface it. I noticed that Mr. Heberly said it's good to have an in-house attorney available for all meetings and be available on call. And they went on to talk to Mr. Schwabauer, who was the Lodi City Attorney, and his cost was $500,000 at that time to the city. That was his budget, and how much his expenses were.
Oh, that budget, like you said, that was his people with him as well.
Correct.
Not just him.
Yeah, Mr. Schwabauer was in there as well. So it was an interesting article, and I thank you guys for picking it up with that. Yeah, it says $61.41 per student at that time, which was 10 years ago. I was looking at it this way, after talking, well, emailing, it's not a good way to converse, that we have an in-house or on-retainer attorney deal with negotiations and board issues and answers to the board. Because right now, all your attorneys answer to just different district employees. And I thought that now would be a great time before we approve this, that we look at an in-house attorney just for negotiations and dealing with board issues. And if we had a suit set against the board or something else, then we could contract that out, or maybe that person could take it on. Is what I was trying to drive at. Okay. And I think our fees with, I believe it's, is it Kingsley Board, is it correct, Bogart? Are close to $300,000. And I've been talking to a few businessmen in town and insurance people and so forth. They think the idea of a retainer would be most efficient in terms of economics for us in that position. Now for special ed, and from what I gathered today, those issues seem to be so complex that you need an attorney that would be specific. And Mr. Warren, I guess, oversees that attorney, and he's made adjustments to what he feels is comfortable for him and his staff, given the complex issues of special ed. My feeling is, in looking at this, and I'm going to keep it short, this warrant is that we bust it out and we look at Kingsley Boulevard and remove that from this. So we'd have to table it, remove them, and maybe form a subcommittee where we actually look at hiring an attorney on retainer for the board and negotiations. And some years we might not need that lawyer for negotiations that much. And some years we might need them a lot. But they're on retainer, so the expenses will be kept at a minimum. Plus there'd be an incentive by them to get things done quickly. Because right now everything's building, especially with negotiations. Whereas in the other areas which are more specified, we would keep things as it is. So that's kind of where I'm going right now with this. I'm going to vote no on this issue because I believe that we need to hire an in-house attorney. I would like to see us, if we could, I don't know, it's 2.5 years in the board and still naive, if we could pull that part out and then approve the rest of it, because I'm fine with that. But I do think that we need to look at that out. That's my point, and that's my opinion on that issue in regards to what we need as a board for our own advice and for negotiation.
Other comments from the board?
You know, if I can.
Yes, Mr. Neely.
I absolutely agree with Mr. Porter on this. I think that our own in-house attorney could have some other benefits as well. And like I said, if that attorney has time, then they can also work with obtaining grants for us, because grants are all about how they're written, and that's what attorneys do. Oh, I'm telling you this. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Neely.
But I think that would be, I agree that's the direction that we should, at least appoint a committee. Let's get serious about this. We've been, to me, most districts our size have their own attorneys.
They do. I did a lot of research.
Any other comments from the board?
I have a quick one.
Vice President McFarland.
Guys, I'm going to tell you, I disagree with you. I think an in-house is a great idea. I think that every entity that we do business with has their own representation. And for us to have an in-house to oversee all areas, I think we have some risk involved. We are a large district. I think an in-house is a great idea. I would agree with that. But to separate these out and try to save money on legal fields makes me a little bit nervous. I think there's one thing that's worth its weight in gold, and that is legal advice. Doesn't mean you're going to use them, doesn't mean you're going to bring them to every battle or every negotiation, but without legal advice, you're kind of twisting out the wind. I think we are a large entity, and I think without the individual specialties, I think we're putting ourselves at risk.
Let's talk about cutting this. That's not what I'm talking about anyway.
Well,
I'm talking about an attorney that works with them.
So you're talking about adding to this?
Yes, well.
Then I would be in favor of that, but to say to remove one of these or limit their exposure for us, or limit their help for us, I would be very against
So these
that.
are so specialized, you can't do that.
Well, and I think there's a history there, and when you're with an attorney or an accountant for a long period of time, and there's many other things, as you build history with them, for instance, I'm going to use you, Mr. McKilligan. We couldn't reproduce what's in his brain for 20 years if we wanted to, and that's kind of the relationship with your attorney. If you have an attorney and you've used an attorney in your private business or personally, they have a history with you. They know where you've been and where you need to go. And a lot of these relationships, well, I don't know that personally. You can go back and look at how long our relationship with the district has ensued, and I think they serve a much larger value than just sitting and charging us a fee at a table. They have a lot of history that provides us with good advice.
Very good. Other comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Nava.
Actually, education is complex. My gosh, if you really want to get an attorney, we don't have enough money to pay an attorney to take the job. I'm talking about special area classes. I've done some research also. Not very many school districts have. Maybe the small ones do, but not the large ones. I'm talking about a whole bunch of them that don't have personal attorneys. This is a complex thing. Education is complex. If we can have, how many employees do we have in this district? Okay, we can have that many problems. Everything is liable. I mean, quick. I don't think so. I am all for keeping it as it is, and let it maybe later on get a committee of board members that are for this to come up with some plan, and I will look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nava. Other comments from the board?
I also
Mr. Connexted.
will vote to approve this contract. However, I'm intrigued by the idea that Mr. Porter and Mr. Neely are talking about, and it sounds like a pretty good idea, but I'm not willing to throw this baby out with the bathwater right now. So, but I would like to have more information and maybe another look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Connexted. Mr. Porter, do you want me to come back to you?
Yeah, just in reference to a couple comments. First of all, I'm not saying that we get rid of all of legal. I'm saying that we parse out what one organization does for us, which is in terms of negotiations and dealing with the board. And we don't know if that said organization or law firm would not want to work under retainer. We don't know that. But I do not want to remove all the law firms from what they're doing, which is this specific area for what they do, and they're answerable to the board. Right now, they're not answerable to the board. Okay? They're answerable to Dr. Washington. So it would put a little more clarity in. As far as schools close to us, Mr. Nava, Stockton has their own in-house attorney to handle just what I'm talking about. And other large districts have their own in-house attorney to handle similar situations. So it's not a revolution. And when I did my master's in governance training, a lot of school districts are moving towards having an in-house attorney to deal with the very thing. Special ed, I'm not talking about that. Any of those other special areas like buildings and things like that. I'm talking about just general negotiations, dealing with the board on issues of Brown Act, all the things that come out that we have to deal with, get comments from, and so forth, contract renewals, things like that. That's just how I feel on that issue. And also, I did a dive, and one of our law firms that we looked at ended up. I mean, if you take a look at some of the clients, it's interesting to see some of the judgments that have gone against them and how much it's costing the districts. One of them had to close the school because of a law firm's decision. So that's just kind of the things that I think. So if we pull this out, I don't want to kick the can down the road. You did 11 years ago, and I thought you brought it up then. I applauded you, because that's way far thinking. At the time, you were looking ahead. Now we're 10 years later. We need to get on it because costs are going up.
Other comments from the board? Mr. Everly?
Thank you. I would put this in the same category as what we did a lot on the last meeting is LCAP. We need to start soon. Budget. We need to start soon. And why? So we can see how we can streamline, how we can change things if we see that it needs to be changed. Eliminate what we think needs to be eliminated for the sake of the budget and so forth. I look at this as the same thing, is that I certainly don't have a problem with us looking into it like we did 11 years ago. Conditions change, things change, and I'm all in favor of us looking at an in-house attorney. We need to obviously do a lot of work to get that done, defining what we actually want them to do. So I certainly have no problem looking at that, but in the meantime, I think that we have, from judging from the last time, it took a while to get a lot of the information and to do our research and so forth, and I just feel that we shouldn't be holding up this agenda item while we do that. That's like saying we're going to hold up the LCAP until we figure out what we're going to do for next year. So I would vote for this evening, but I would absolutely be in favor of us looking at some kind of legal changes in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Everly. I think all the board has spoken. Comments from the public?
Good evening, President Freitas, members of the board. Dr. Washer, a couple of questions on the contract list. Agree with Mr. Porter's question on doing a deeper dive into some of the contracts and really evaluating how are they working for us. I have a couple of clarifying questions. If it's okay with the chair, I believe Mr. Khan might be the one to answer this. On item number 1 that's at the top for Lozano Smith, I understand that is being amended for the 2020-21 school year. So that amendment was for services provided last school year. If I could ask that question, is that correct?
This is for the SELPA. Mr. Warren can probably answer.
Yeah, that's correct. Does this one work? Yes, that's correct.
And so item.
Could you say that again? I don't think we heard that.
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Ward.
So looking at number 9, that is the projected cost for next year, correct?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, 298,000. See, I can't see that far.
298,391
is what we project for the whole year, or just for litigation that's.
I can speak to that part because this is all, but with special ed local plan areas, their lawsuits are part of the business. Budgets were very, very low in previous years, in essence when I first arrived, and we were constantly being asked for more budget and more budget. For a period of time, about a year and a quarter, we asked Mr. Warren's department to just keep requesting more budget until we found where it settled, and that's, I'm not sure why we didn't do 300,000, but this is exactly where your budget department believes is a reasonable plus or minus spend every year at this point for salary.
Thank you. I think that I understand your explanation as budgeting for this next year's SELPA. Thank you for that. We would, of course, question the need for as much budgeting as I see for Kingsley Bogard, as I think we would like to see that money spent elsewhere. The other 3 contract items have to do with the Sheriff, Lodi PD, and Stockton PD. We believe as public entities and part of what our tax dollars pay for in our city limits, that servicing our schools should be part of the city's expense, and those LCFF dollars should be spent maybe on more salaries for more teachers, lower class size, certainly the need for bus drivers and cleaning our classrooms. So we would just protest that our budget is being spent in those areas, our contracts for city employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other comments from the public? All right.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve item A2.
Hang on a second, Mr. Nova.
I'm fine.
I thank Mr. Porter for pulling this matter, and I would like to thank Sheriff Pat Withrow, Stockton Chief of Police Eric Jones, and Lodi Chief of Police Sierra Bruscia for once again entering into contracts with our schools. As we've seen time and time again, and as we recognize, our SROs are just amazing resources on our campuses, and I think we saw so many of them during graduation. And I thank each of them, and I encourage Sheriff Withrow and Chief Jones to follow Chief Bruscia's lead, that we get the 2-for-1 deal. So we get 4 for the price of 2. But I'm, baby steps, and I'm so excited to see this matter coming forward. Also, on item number 8, Kingsley Bogard. I think we can research this all day. There is no way that we can get the services that we get from Kingsley Bogard. And I disagree with you, Mr. Porter, respectfully, but they are the attorneys for the board. They answer to the board, not to Dr. Washer. And my years of experience with them, that we've gotten nothing but sound advice from them, and it would take 2 words out of place, and we could be liable for millions and millions of dollars. So I am in agreement with board members that we keep this. But it is my understanding that you are making a motion at this time to pull item 8 from item A2. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that your motion?
That's correct.
Okay.
Because I don't want to vote no on our police officers or SROs, but I'm going to have to vote no because of item 8 in there. If it was pulled, it would allow me a little more flexibility.
Very good. And is there a second? And that motion dies for failure of a second. Mr. Nava, you have a motion at this time?
Yes, I do. I move that we approve item A2 on the routine agenda.
Mr. Nava, thank you for your motion. Thank you, Mr. McFarland, Vice President McFarland, for your second. And we'll go ahead and call for the vote. See, Michael just has to wave his magic wand. And item A2 passes 6-1. Moving on to other action items, we have item OAI1, Agriculture Career Technical Education Incentive Grant.
Student discipline matters. I move we approve student discipline matters, Mr. Pbis.
Well, of course, Mr. Nava is correct. The next time Mr. Nava is wrong, that would be the first time. So, Thank you, Mr. Nava, for your correction and your motion. Thank you, Mr. Neely, for your second. We go ahead on consent agenda B, student discipline cases. We call for the vote. You can have it. And student discipline cases carry 7-0. Other action items. Item OAI1, Mr. Palmquist. If you want, I can introduce it a second time.
This is fine.
Very
Thank you,
good.
President Freitas, members of the board, and Dr. Washer. What you see before you is a renewal of the ag incentive grants. This grant does require a district funding match. However, we fulfill that through the CTIG funding that we already get. So this is to fund ag education projects.
Mr. Palmquist, you promised me that when we do this next year, McNair will be on this list. Is that correct?
I promise that. I don't recall that, but I'd be happy to have a conversation about anything you'd like.
You implied
related
it.
to,
You strongly implied that we will have McNair on this list.
that may be a different funding source than this grant, but yes, thank you very much.
Well, we know when Mr. Palmquist says he's going to look into something, that he's going to make it happen, so.
Yeah, I think that was only a couple of months ago and it was a different funding source. However, this funding source is a renewal to continue on with the programs we have.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Palmquist. Other questions from the board?
Only one question for Jeff. The Bear Creek deal, the contract on there, is Eric in charge of that or Hillary? Because Eric signed that and you didn't have a principal from Bear Creek sign it. Just curious.
On this project here?
Yes. See, you have your 3 high schools, right? And each high school has their own principal sign it.
Oh, okay, let me see.
Yeah, that's Eric Sampson.
Oh, yeah, it is Eric Sandstrom. I don't have an answer for that. That would be Ms. Jansen. I can look into it with Ms. Jansen. But Mr. Sandstrom is here. Yes. However, yes, a principal did sign it. I can look into why it is that principal, or if he knows, he can tell us.
In the past, it's always been a principal that has signed off on it.
And that's who Julie had? Okay.
That answers my question.
There you go.
She signed 3 of them then, Derek. She signed all 3 of
Kind of
them.
getting deja vu all over
I
again.
ran out of ink.
Okay.
No, I think we're the same thing, and then we discussed this last year.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Porter, for your second. Thank you, Mr. Heberly, for your second. Mr. Porter, for your motion. Other comments from the board? And comments from the public? We have a motion and second. We'll go ahead and call for the vote. And I'm sure if Ms. Harrell was available, she'd be glad to sign again for Bear Creek.
She just acknowledged that she would love to sign.
With it, no doubt. We'd love to have her sign also. Item OAI1 carries 7-0. Item OAI2, the AB 1200 documents for Lodi Unified School District Employees Group. Mr. Khan, confidential group.
Thank you, President Freitas, members of the board, Dr. Washer. This is a public disclosure document for the recent negotiation settlement between the board and its confidential unit. This will add approximately $92,000 to the district's budget in the following budget year, 2020.
Same as what we offered all of our other bargaining groups?
That's correct.
And that's a COLA and a stipend?
Well, this is the 3.26% COLA.
Yes. Very.
That's what the document is for.
This is what the document is for. Very good. Other comments from the board?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Conexon.
And if I read this right, which I think I did, items OA1, 2 through 8 are all the same percentages, and is that correct?
3.26%.
Okay. I move we pass items numbers 2 through 8.
Thank you, Mr. Conexon. Other comments from the board? Comments from the public? We have a motion for Mr. Conexon. Oh, yes. How are you?
Good.
Well, I'm understanding this is about the raises for different substitutes.
This is the raises for confidential employees.
Oh, I thought we were on the other one.
Oh,
I'll
I'm sorry, I thought you said.
I said,
Yeah, they said all the way through.
But substitutes is coming up.
Okay.
All right, that is one at a time. That is OAI 8. Is that right?
So I'm confused. Are we passing 2 through 8 right now, or are we going?
We're going to take it step by step. I'm sorry about that confusion.
it was a good suggestion.
You're currently on 2.
All right. Draw the two.
So with regards to, I believe it's the 1,200 disclosure, I'm confused because when Leah did this, it was salary schedules that were posted, and we were told that the previous salary schedules were part of what had to be posted for the AB 1200. This is the document that goes to the county. Is there a reason for the difference, or did I misunderstand what we approved in May and the documents we had to take a look at?
Mr. Constance?
I won't speak to the misunderstanding that this document's in compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay. We have a motion from Mr. Knackstead as to item OEI 2.
Second.
And only item OEI 2. Thank you, Vice President McFarland, for your second. We'll go ahead and call for the vote on item OAI 2 only. And that passes 7-0. Item OAI 3, this is improvement to confidential salary schedule. Mr. McKilligan.
Yes, Mr. President, this item improves the confidential employees in the same manner and structure as the agreements that you have with your represented employees.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. McKilligan.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Knackstead, for
Second.
your motion. Thank you, Vice President McFarland, for your second. Other comments from the board? Comments from the public? And, you know, the board works very closely with the confidential employees group, and they do a great job. And it's our honor to be recognizing them here tonight, as it is to recognize all of our bargaining groups. And thank you, board, for getting this done. And we'll go ahead and call for the vote. And item OAI 3 carries 7-0. Congratulations, confidential employees. Item OAI 4, AB 1200 documents for the LUSD management group. Mr. Khan.
Thank you, President Freitas, members of the board, Dr. Washer. This is the public disclosure document for your management group. This will increase your expenditures by $1,085,000 in the following year. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And the management group includes who?
All site administration plus some of your cabinet.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Khan. Other comments from the board? Yes, Mr. Porter.
Yes, I brought this up last year. I really concern myself, and I'm looking across the board on this. That we're developing a huge income inequality between your lowest paid teacher, your lowest paid CSEA, to now your principals and VPs and APs. I just think that we need to look at how we give out a percentage and instead change it to a certain dollar amount based on a certain cell. And in that way we can reduce the inequality from the top of the step to the bottom, where we're seeing gross differences now. So I'll be voting no on this issue for that reason.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Other comments from the board? Comments from the public?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve this item.
Thank you, Mr. Nava, for your motion. Thank you, Mr. Neely, for your second. We'll go ahead and call for the vote. And item OAI 4, the AB 1200 documents, carries 6-1. Item OAI 5, improvement to the management salary schedule. Mr. McKilligan.
Mr. President, this item improves the management employees in the same manner and structure as agreements that you have with your represented employees.
Thank you, Mr. Killigan.
Chairman, I
Comments
move we
from-
approve this item.
Thank you, Mr. Nob, for your motion.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Knackset, for your second. Other comments from the board?
Yes, how much is the 3% that's being applied? Stipend?
Sorry, what?
You said the amount of 3% applied in range 455, step 5. How much is that amount?
I don't have it in front of me. I shared it previously. It's about $4,000.
And then what's LEA, CSEA, what are their amounts roughly?
They're all different. LEA's around 2,000 something. CSEA I think was 1,500, but I don't have the numbers in front of me.
All right, then I struggle with us paying double to the management again versus what our other salary people are making.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Neely.
I have a comment on that. First of all, I think that the management group did not, even though they worked the extra week, did not receive an extra week's of pay on that. And also, even though our management group worked extensively the long hours also, did not time card any additional money either. So I just want to make sure that we are clear on that. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. Other comments, Mr. Porter?
Yes, the time carding was for teaching synchronously, and I doubt that any management taught synchronously. So let's clarify what they're time carded for. That was for teachers that were teaching synchronously, and management, of course, did not have to do that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Porter. Other comments from the board? Comments from the public? Before we have a motion from Mr. Nava and a second from Mr. Knackset. I got to tell you, Dr. Washer, this year there was no playbook for what we asked our administrators to do. And what they accomplished in all of our groups, without singling out, was nothing short of amazing. That we've crossed the finish line and that we're all here. And our administrators were tasked time and time again. And I am very excited that they're being recognized in the same way as all of our bargaining groups are being recognized. And they have the appreciation of the board for the amazing job that they did. So I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote on this matter. And this item, OAI 5, the improvement to the management salary schedule, carries 6-1. Congratulations, management group. Item OAI 6, approval of the amendment of the CBO's employment contract. Dr. Washer.
Thank you, Mr. Freitas, members of the board. The salary portion of this is in alignment with all other employees.
Very good. Comments of the board? Comments from the public?
We would just ask, with looking at the extension, again, we know that there was an extension right before the 2019-20 contract negotiation started with Leah to extend Dr. Washer's contract. I believe it was to 2023. This is now extending it to 2024.
I think you're an item ahead. We're still on Mr. Collins.
Mr. Kantz, I'm sorry. Let me go to my other notes with regards to, sorry, skipped.
No worries.
With regards to the leadership on Mr. Khan's contract, advancing it to 2023, Leah is very frustrated with some of the things in the leadership that happened, some of the language that was put forward with regards to during SBAC meetings and talking about PARs, having language offered in RTA and then having that withdrawn. We know that the word may was changed. Really feel that if that was not going forward, that should have been more forthcoming, and to hear at meetings later on that it didn't go. We do feel a bit disappointed with that, and we're surprised at the extension of the time frame of until 2023. We also find disparaging increases with CSEA only getting $1,500 stipend, teachers about 2,000, and that amount of 4,000 on top of what? So we have just a little frustration that seems not equitable when we're looking at where some of your lowest paid employees are. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Other comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve item 6.
Thank you, Mr. Nava, for your motion.
Second.
Thank you, Vice President McFarland, for your second. Mr. Khan, what can I say? Again, the budget numbers that we had at one point showed that we were not only driving over a cliff, we were driving over a cliff at 100 miles an hour without our seatbelts on. And then to turn this thing around and that we survived this is not only a testament to you, but your leadership and the staff that you have doing this. You have the board's appreciation, and at the end of the day, that you somehow found COLA and figure out a way to make that happen is no small statement, and greatly appreciate this, and we're very honored to be offering you this contract here tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote. And this carries 6-1. Thank you, Mr. Khan. You have my personal appreciation. Item OAI 7, approval of the superintendent's contract. Mr. Fraze. Oh, that's me. Very good. Dr. Washer, we've talked about this many times, and you were the #2 tenured large school superintendent in the state of California. The pandemic hit a year ago, and the #1 person quit that day. Literally quit that day. And to have your leadership through this, it cannot be stated enough. We greatly appreciate you. I'm very honored that the board is offering you this stay in accordance with all the other employee this district would not survive without your leadership and the leadership that you provided through the staff. So I am very excited that we have this. And is it possible that we have the wishes of the board? Mr. Nava?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve this contract.
And is there...
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Knaxet, for a second. Other comments from the board?
Yes.
Mr. Heverly?
Thank you, Mr. President. There are certain things that you can say about me. One of them is I am consistent, and Dr. Washer knows the problem I have with what was already mentioned, and that is that when we go a percentage, the differences between positions widens, and widens. I do have a problem with that. And Dr. Washer is our contracted employee, and I think that those kinds of things should not be automatic. I think that there should be some discussion about what that position is. And if you notice, I'm using the word position. Dr. Washer knows very well that what I'm talking about is not the person in the position, it's the position that keeps expanding away from, monetarily, it's expanding away from the other employees. I have talked to Dr. Washer in her office about this so that she knows clear well what I'm talking about and that it is not in any way targeting her or her work or performance. This is solely just a personal platform that there has to be some adjustments along the way, and that's why I struggle with this. It's, again, I'm going to say it again, it's not the person in the position, it's the position. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the board? Vice President McFarland.
Thank you. Dr. Washer, again, I like to separate money from the performance, and I would agree with Mr. Headley's comments, but what I would like to say is thank you for your transparency, your diligent work. I know how many hours you put in, just as our teachers and our custodians. Mr. Khan, I could go on and on with the hours that our entire staff and district put in, but I know you probably did not sleep for more than a year. I'm pretty sure Mr. McKilligan didn't either. So I want to thank you. Without your leadership, I don't know where we would be. When we look at other districts around us, I always often say, wow, we're fortunate. And so thank you again. I appreciate all you've done and will continue to do for us.
Thank you, Vice President Farland. Mr. Conexet?
Yeah, Dr. Washer, I also want to say how much I appreciate you doing the job that you do. I don't notice that in CSBA and their newsletter or was put out, had a little blurb today about the number of superintendents in California that are quitting in droves. Thank you for sticking it out with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Conexet. Other comments from the board? Comments from the public?
Similar comments, President Freitas, members of the board. One, we know before our negotiations in 2019, before sunshining and negotiations started, that the Dr. Washer's contract had been extended already. It's now being extended to 2024. We don't think that that is fair and accurate under the conditions that we feel currently, with the lack of what we see as transparent leadership and being issued directives and not clear communication going out to our members. It took us 2 years to reach a settlement and reach that 3.26. It is, as many members have written to you, spoke to you, emailed you, gave you phone calls. We do find that the amount is in excess, and we also find that extending to the years that we're looking at is too many for where we see we are, and where, as I expressed at the last board meeting, the vote of no confidence of leadership and what we've seen over the last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Good evening, board members and Superintendent Washer. First off, I'd like to thank Mr. Freitas and Ms. Washer for responding to my multiple emails about your yearly evaluations. Your continued silence and lack of transparency speaks volumes. I vote no on renewing your contract. Teachers as well as CSA have went 2 years without a contract. Why don't you try it? Ms. Washer, you will get a retroactive raise for the past 3 years of roughly $26,000. That is more than some of your CSA members make in a year. Some of your CSA members don't even gross that in 1 year. Also, you will get a one-time stipend of $4,000. The CSA is still working without a contract. Teachers went without a contract for 2 years. Seems as though this contract came rather easily. The last year has been full of broken promises and lack of transparency from your office. Parents as well as teachers have voted no faith in your leadership. It was voted and published in the record. The teachers voted no confidence in your leadership. A great business is only as good as their employees. And from time to time again, you have shown you will throw them under the bus to fit your own agenda. Also, what happened to freedom of speech? You turned off commenting on the public page. You're a bunch of cowards, not letting people speak their minds. I know I am one person standing before you, but I can tell you I represent many of parents who would vote no if we had the chance to decide if your contract was renewed. Second, provide the evaluations that you were supposed to be made public. You have yet to see those, and I will be making a formal CPRA request, since my informal requests have gone unanswered. Mr. Freitas, your silence speaks volume of your character. I want everyone to know that in addition to your salary of $277,000, your retroactive raise of $26,000, and your one-time stipend of $4,000, you are also allotted a car allowance, insurance, as well as your expense account. I believe the system is broken, as well as the community should get a vote on your extension contract. I can tell you that you may be humbled to be surprised when a lot of the community members vote no. It is my opinion the lack of leadership in our schools remain closed while others open. The faith we have in our school district is on a steep decline, and it all starts at the top. I have a huge I have been a huge voice while fighting to get schools reopened, and I will continue to use my voice to advocate for a better school system. I ask that Ms. Washer's contract not be renewed, and I publicly ask you provide her required yearly public evaluations. Thank you.
I'm sorry. And can we get your name for the record, please?
Branda DeLatorre.
Thank you, Brenda. Other comments from the public? We'll go ahead and call for the vote. And item OAI 7 passes 5-1 with 1 abstention. Congratulations, Dr. Washer.
Mr. Freitas?
Yes.
I just also like to, I don't know of any large corporations or even very large, or any large businesses where you have a CEO that doesn't make more than everybody else in the business. We're no different than anybody else. So, you know, this has much to do about nothing, I think.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Connexit. All right, moving on with the agenda, we have item OAI 8, increase with classified substitute and certificated substitute pay rates. Mr. McKilligan?
Yes, Mr. President, this item improves the substitute employees in the same manner and structure as the rest of the employees that your represented employees.
Thank you, Mr. McKilligan. We couldn't have survived without our substitutes, and I'm very glad that the board is able to honor them here tonight. Any other comments from the board? Comments from the public?
Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Washer. My name is Chris Beach. I'm a CSEA employee and the kitchen manager. I see that you are going to start to pay substitute workers more than a contracted worker in the same classification. You already have a problem keeping employees, and now you show them how much you don't care about them. It used to be that your biggest competition for workers was other school districts. Other school districts no longer see you as competition. We get their leftovers. Now our competition is McDonald's, and guess what? McDonald's is winning. They start out at $15 plus an hour. To work here, a person needs to have a GED or better, be fingerprinted, and pass a background check at their own expense, and still make less. If you are trying to make your workers leave, you are doing a good job. The solution is to have decent raises to all employees. 3.26% is not a decent raise when it leaves classifications lower than minimum wage. Now, your budget people will tell you that the state and federal funding did not keep up with the minimum wage increases. But your ending fund balance over the last 5 years seems to contradict that. What someone says that they can't afford something and then has 30, 40, 50, 60 million and more left over, you need to question why. And when you question that person, figure out why you want to believe them. When you question them and they come up with a new reserve, such as the declining enrollment reserves, you need to question it. They don't need to find a new place to hide money. There is enough to keep up with the minimum wage increases. You just need to tell them to do it. They have to listen to you. Tell them to lower or eliminate unnecessary reserves. The businesses that are thriving are the ones that put a decent wage. The ones that continue to offer the bare minimum are the ones closing their doors and going out of business because they have no one that wants to work for their scraps. You can do better than scraps. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Other comments from the public? All right.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve item 8.
Thank you, Mr. Nava, for your motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Canassa, for your second.
And I do have a comment.
Yes, Mr. Canassa.
It's probably inappropriate at this point, but I'm just curious on when background checks and fingerprinting, it does seem to me that the district could probably shoulder that expense. And I don't, Mr. McKillian, if we have a volunteer coach do they have to shoulder the expense of being fingerprinted? Is kind of, yeah, so I don't know, it's something maybe we might want to look at in the future, is to figure out a way that we can pay for that kind of stuff, especially if somebody's volunteering. You know, it's like a penalty. So anyway, something I'm thinking about for near future maybe.
More comments?
Yeah, if,
Mr. Porter?
to show how ironic this is, if you retire as a teacher and then you want to come back and substitute, you have to be re-fingerprinted and pay for it yourself. So you could have worked 30 years in this district and then you wanted to substitute, help out the district that you love, but yet you still have to pay for your fingerprinting in order to be a substitute.
So we're agreeing. Maybe
Gary, whatever virus you
write
have,
that down.
this way.
Good.
But I'm
Sounds
agreeing
like
with you
an
on this
agenda
item.
item.
And I'm going to agree that with,
Sounds like an agenda item.
I agree with both of you that this is not what we're voting on, but anyway.
Sorry.
But thank you for bringing those up, and thank you, Mr. Everly. I agree that if we can look at doing this, and I'm sure Mr. Khan would figure out a way that since we use so many more substitutes, everything else, that we can have the federal government pay this under CARES or some other of their grants. So, anyway, going ahead and calling for the vote. This item carries 6-1. And congratulations, substitutes in CSEA. Personnel matters, Mr. McKilligan.
Mr. President, routine personnel matters are presented for your consideration.
Very good.
Chairman, I move we approve personnel matters.
Thank you, Mr. Nalva, for your motion. Thank you, Vice President McFarland, for your second. Any other comments from the board? Any comments from the public? Go ahead and call for the vote. And personnel matters carries 7-0. Report items. Mr. Khan, we have an update on our state budget adoption and COVID funding.
Thank you, President Pbis, members of the board, Dr. Washer. I'll run through the executive summary very quickly. The legislature did pass the state's budget June 14th. That's one day ahead of the constitutional requirement. There is some concern that they rushed it through. This is not out of the norm. They've done it several times in the past few years. They get it done and then they go back into the back rooms and try and work out a tri-party deal, the Assembly, Senate, and the governor. It's the media that I've read indicates that the remaining items really are at the margin. It's the deferral paybacks, it's the implementation of the rainy day fund, and we should not expect any large changes to the big core items in the budget. There were board members interested in the 65% concentration talk. The probability of that is probably sinking rapidly. I understand that it did not fare well in Senate discussions, and senators were generally leaning towards a larger base if there were any increase to proposed budget funding. There was a huge surplus this recent year, but as takeaways, I would probably guide people to focus on the fact that I remember several years ago I was asked, everybody's talking about recession, what do you think about recession? And then at that point, unemployment was very low, interest rates were very low, stocks were very high, and housing was increasing in price. Much of that's still in place, but unemployment is a weak link right now. Depending on who you read, it might be because it's hard to attract people, or that simply put, some jobs are going away forever. So that's an issue we all need to pay attention to. The enrollment decline is unfortunately, the Public Policy Institute projects 7% additional decline in the state over the next 10 years. There are newspaper articles outlining 155,000 student decline in the COVID period. Especially hard hit was kinder, but there might be a silver lining. Many expect kinder to sort of bounce back in the 21-22 year, simply because children that were, especially children that were closer to the December 2nd date in terms of their birthday, might come back into kinder rather than going straight into first grade. So we still focus heavily on our enrollment decline in all of our budget work. Also, at the end of the state budget report is a table. Mr. Neely had requested something of this sort to basically an indication of what does the enrollment decline mean in dollars. I'd be happy to discuss this with you further, Mr. Neely, if there's something you want changed or if there's another way you'd like this to look. But this is I can move on to the COVID money or take questions on the state report now.
Sure. Okay, thank you, Mr. Khan. I know that there was some issues between the governor and the Senate specifically on how to address the education funding. One of the things that I understood the Senate wanted to do was to pay off the deferrals. Have you seen any progress on that?
Everything's behind closed doors right now. So,
okay.
But the school services and the bigger newspapers, LA Times and San Francisco Chronicle, both indicate that the deferrals were one of the biggest talking points.
And then, so you probably don't know this one either. I mean, it's probably the same thing behind closed doors. But there was talk about paying down the STRS, giving, I think it was $3 billion or so to.
I read something similar as well, but
yeah.
I only read it in the newspaper, not in school services.
So we don't have anything else on that either. Okay, but those are two distinct possibilities, right?
Yeah, and the timeline's narrowing. I mean, he's got to sign this early July, so.
Yeah, they're calling this a placeholder budget that was signed.
There are similar budgets previous years. I mean, and a lot of it has to do with the money level differences between LAO and DOF as well. So.
Right. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Moving on.
With the executive summary for the COVID money, President Freitas, members of the board, Dr. Washer, I won't go into any depth at all in terms of the presentation, but what we did was we took each of the various pots of money, we identified the actual resource code for the board, and then we gave the dollar amounts. And these are actual expenditures and encumbrances as of late last week. So I know that we are planning on preparing more of a budget-like look at this in September when Senior Director Juarez brings the board their unaudited actuals. We would like the board to have a look at exactly what the COVID money is separated so the board can determine the actual impact on the general budget as well. But in each of these, with the exception of the final three, which there's still a lot to be determined, each of these carries their own page in this report, and the last page has the three pots of money that are as yet sort of floating around in decision-making land, including the ESSER 3 money, which will be the largest pot of cash that the board receives throughout all of the COVID period. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Mr. Freitas. Okay, the COVID money is going to come in chunks. Is that correct? At different times?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when it comes in 1 year, we may not be spending some of that money until the next year. Is that correct?
That could easily happen, yes, sir.
So it has to be realized in the year that we get it, even though we're not going to spend it, so it's going to show up as a carryover. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So we can be looking at some really,
Large carryover.
okay. You're gonna have to do
And
a
those
lot of
will show-
explaining on that. As we go through this, you're gonna have to let everybody know, we're gonna have to make it very, very public what those carryovers are about.
So that's the purpose of almost doing two unaudited actuals, one for your statutory requirements, which is your actual expenditures for 2021, and then also a separate one with just the COVID money.
Okay,
So that-
that's a great idea as far as an explanation method, but is that the way it's gonna be submitted?
The general budget is a statutory thing. That will be the UA or the unaudited actual that the board is used to seeing every September. That will go to county
Okay.
approval.
And it will be less COVID, is that correct?
Well, it will include actual expenditures, which will include COVID, but
Okay,
your carryover won't appear until your first interim in November.
okay.
So that's when, but at UA, we will also show you these budgets in a budget format so the board can have a better understanding of how much money we're actually talking.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Neely. Other comments from the board? Mr. Haberlin?
So with certain, there's a lot of COVID money coming, a lot of different titles. They have a lot of different functions and requirements. So if, let's say, COVID money X, we don't spend it all, at what point do we have to return it or not accept it?
So all the dates, the shelf lives are included in each table. So with this 7425, 7426, that shelf life ends August 22. If we do not have either legitimate or in some cases approved expenditures, because this is all federal money, it's all restricted money. So the board is aware, I'm sure, that we're going to try and get some facilities work done with some of this. Any expenditure per unit over $5,000 must be approved by CDE in advance. So for those items that are legitimate spends or that have been previously approved, they're fine. Anything else not spent will go back.
Other comments from the board? Comments from the public? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Khan, for your reports, and you will let us know what we need to do when we need to do it. Much appreciated. Okay. We have a second report item on. Dr. Solly, you have a report on our school improvement plan. Dr. Seha, very good to see you this evening also.
Thank you, President Freitas, members of the board, and Dr. Washer. Somewhat interesting. The slide you see before you is pretty much the same as it was. The things that have changed, the word update was added, and the date used to say March 3, 2020. So this was last presented to you the week prior to shutdown. So in reviewing this document, we made some reviews or modifications to remove a few items, to edit or modify a few items, and to add a few items. Next slide, please. The report is broken down really into 3 focus areas, district-wide and Title I schools, and then focus schools. Focus schools, as you can see, are listed there. Some of those were CSI schools, and some of those were, I understand, added by input of the board. So this funding also helps direct some of these, like the Title I, obviously with Title I, and District 1 funding with LCFF funds. What is not factored into a piece of this is what Mr. Khan was actually just speaking to. The American Rescue Plan, or otherwise known as ESSER 3 funding, is just being released, and there will be a plan provided to the board in the fall and August, and needs to be approved in September. And some of those fundings will impact some of the plan that we have here, and also require more discussion and modifications, as Mr. Everly referred to earlier, when you start planning now for these. But what we have in this plan is based upon what was provided prior to COVID. And so the impact of COVID will appear. You'll see some more references to social and emotional supports and such. And so I would just bring this to your attention for your review and your input and your comments and further direction. So I'll turn this over to Dr. Sayed to walk through sort of the meat of it.
Thank you, President Freitas, Dr. Washer, members of the board. So yeah, it seems like over a year ago we were last talking about school improvement, but we appreciate efforts of the board to bring these back. We realize student outcomes at our Title I sites is a big interest for the board, and we put together a plan on how to address some of those outcomes and develop a systematic approach to improve student outcomes at our sites. So the first part, district-wide supports for all schools. This first part speaks to social-emotional learning. As you know, we've implemented a universal screener partnering with Panorama to get some social-emotional learning data for our students. Our counselors have begun using that data to implement tiered interventions to students to help support their social-emotional learning needs. We have also begun implementing social-emotional learning curriculum at 14 sites, and we are looking to expand those efforts to include more of our sites in the upcoming school year. We are also implementing mental health supports. During this current year, we've partnered with several outside agencies to include some mental health supports. During the upcoming year, we are also going to be asking each school site in our district to develop a student achievement plan to address learning loss that's happened during the coronavirus pandemic and meet the needs of their school community. As far as Title I supports, one of the things we see, an ongoing need is for staff to collaborate and look at student data. They're going to be doing that through academic conferences. We have a universal screener in place for early literacy, which I know is a big priority for the board. This upcoming year, we've hired and are going to be working with 6 reading intervention teachers that are going to be focusing on early literacy. We're going to be working with our instructional coaches to provide support for them to be successful in their new roles. In addition to that, we are looking at using ESSER funds to provide additional paraprofessionals to help address some of the learning loss that's happened during the current school year. 2 of the areas we really want to make sure that the paraprofessionals assist with is reading by 3rd grade and also preparing our students for 7th grade math. The last part, I wanted to spend a moment just talking about multi-tiered systems of supports. I know we all have varying levels of knowledge regarding multi-tiered systems of supports. Recently, I heard an analogy about multi-tiered systems of support, and I think it helps explain what this is. Multi-tiered systems of support is providing supports for the whole child, academic, behavioral, social-emotional learning, and it's really one of the analogies I learned recently was going to the dentist. We know our children need to go to the dentist, right? And so all of the kids go to the dentist. That's a tier 1 intervention. So in MTSS, everybody gets that support. There are some students who have, some crooked teeth. I was one of them when I was younger. They need orthodontics. So that's a tier 2 support. They get additional support. They help straighten their teeth, to help make sure they have healthy teeth throughout their whole life. And then tier 3 level supports is looking at an oral surgeon. You have somebody with deep decay in their mouth, they really need a lot of extra support. That's looking at an oral surgeon where, they might be placed under general anesthesia and they really need lots of additional support. That would be akin to our tier 3 supports. So when we're teaching our children, we can look at supporting their academic health kind of the way that we support our children's oral health, providing tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 interventions. And that's really what multi-tiered systems of support provides. It provides those structures for staff to meet regularly and discuss data and develop tiered interventions to support our student needs. So we're really excited. We have about 8 sites that are going to be implementing some of these practices during the 21-22 school year, and we're really excited to share updates during the upcoming school year regarding the implementation of MTSS at those school sites. All right, and the last item on this page is there was a need for additional vice principal FTE. You'll notice if you've looked at the report, some of the numbers are off. I know staff worked very diligently to get this report to board, but you'll notice in some places for the elementary level it says 3, in some places it says 2, so really that's up to the board in which direction we want to head. I believe that the most consistent number is 2.0 FTE for the elementary level vice principals, and then 1.0 FTE for the middle school vice principals. All right, next page, page 4. All right, and then you'll see here the focus schools. These are schools where school board has identified that we really want to provide some additional resources to improve student outcomes. They are Sutherland, Park Lane, Claremont, and Delta Sierra. At these sites, we want to provide some additional support to improve student outcomes. We want to provide professional development based on site needs, additional vice principals. You'll see there at Sutherland, 0.5 vice principal, Claremont, 0.5 to make that a 1.0 FTE, and then at Delta Sierra, 0.5 to make that 2.0 FTE at Delta Sierra. Park Lane already has a 1.0 FTE, so that's why that site was not on the list of additional vice principals. We are also providing additional reading intervention support and paraprofessionals, and we're looking at exploring a partnership with AmeriCorps to provide additional tutoring at these sites to help students improve academically. And then the last bullet of those supports is additional counselor FTE at elementary sites, with priority given to these school sites for additional counselor support. And then, with any issues that require bargaining, we work with employee groups to negotiate those issues. And then the last part here is showing some of the funding sources. I believe Dr. Sali already spoke to some of these, but comprehensive support and improvement is one of the big funding sources. Title I, general funds, and also the CARES ESSER funding, and then the new expanded learning opportunity and in-person learning supports. We'll use all available funding to support these school sites. Okay, next page. Next page, please. All right, and then here on this next slide, we really want to continue the work we've done with professional learning communities, establishing structures for staff to regularly meet to look at their student data and develop plans based on that data. One of the things we believe is key is the second bullet underneath professional learning communities is providing staff with the training, time, and data to site leaders in order for them to set up the professional learning community structures. And then this last part, I already went into the multi-tiered systems of support, but here it goes over some of the things we already have in place. Pbis is part of MTSS, which we would definitely continue. What we're doing with MTSS is we're adding not only behavioral, which is provided by Pbis, but we're adding academic and social emotional learning supports as well. Next page. As far as district-wide staffing, we are looking at filling the elementary director position. Board brought that forward last year, but due to funding related to COVID, that we did not move forward with that position. Now that the funding prospects look better, we're looking at bringing that position back. Also, there's a need for English learner coordinator support. We have lots of English learners in our district, and there are supports that these students need in order to acquire English as a second language. In addition, there's lots of statutory requirements that we need to make sure that our school sites and staff follow, and this position would help us in implementing those supports across the district. The next part goes over Pbis. I know in 1819 we had lots of sites that were certified silver and gold. We want to make sure that we continue to implement Pbis structures across our school sites, and we currently have a Pbis coach that's supporting school sites with those implementations, and we certainly want to continue that support moving forward. All right. And then the last bullet on this page, we're looking at partnering with Point Quest to provide additional mental health supports through ESSER at all of our school sites, provide a certain number of hours per week for school sites in order to support their mental health needs across the district. And then the last part, we do recognize that there is a need for staff to support mental health and social emotional learning needs of our students. Currently, we don't have established positions to meet that need. So we are seeking board input and approval into looking at establishing some other positions like licensed professionals such as behavioral specialists, licensed clinical social worker, and other social emotional learning supports. We feel that would be a great help in supporting our students' mental health and social emotional learning needs. And I'll put it back to Dr. Solly. He's going to go over the rest of the report.
So this slide just gets into some granular detail on the funding sources for those actions. This one relates to Title I schools, and the next slide relates to our focus schools that we've identified, the 4 schools. There is some CSI funding that comes with the CSI schools that we've just learned that will be continuing for probably 2 years at least. They were tied to, in some ways, the dashboard, which was suspended, so they were kind of in a holding pattern, but we're hearing that they're going to continue to fund CSI supports for schools. And then we just a little more granular data for you to get around that. There isn't a table per se for district-wide support, but on the district-wide support slide, a couple slides back, the numbers were actually included on the slide. So with that summary, we're seeking some direction and some guidance in your continued support and direction for our ed services departments. I know Mr. Palmquist and McGregor are deeply involved in this. These are their sites they supervise, so turn it over to you now for questions and comments, and Dr. Washer to sort of summarize.
Thank you both for that. Greatly appreciate that. Mr. Freitas, members of the board, I do want to point out one thing. I want to emphasize that with this, we are proposing that each school site have the opportunity to develop their own plan and to be funded out of the pots of money that Mr. Kahn had explained, shared with you before for the COVID relief, the state and federal money as they apply. We know that each site is different, each site is unique, each community is different, and the staffs know best what they need. And our intent is to have the staffs work together to come up with their plans, their ideas and strategies on what will help improve. And we're looking at, the goals that we've talked about before for several years now. Reading by the end of 3rd grade, having students be prepared for math when they enter 7th grade and 9th grade, and now with the focus on social and emotional supports, not only for students but for staff as well. and also that parent community component. So our intent is to have staff very much involved in creating some of the plans. And, we have a unique opportunity here to fund some creative ideas and solutions that we haven't had before. And we're hoping that folks will take advantage of that. We'll think big, we'll think creative, and do some things that they've always thought, well, why can't we just, we don't have the money. Well, let's do it now. Now's the time.
Very good. Before we take comments from the board, why don't we take our evening 5-minute recess?
Look at the report.
Simplest way to explain it, right? Tier
'Cause he was standing right there and you got whooped for it.
I told you, I leaned over to her and I went, it stops when it hits something solid. Yeah, probably just really hard on your tax.
That's his cake, but he always brings it.
And then he took the same line. He flew over the sidewalk and ran into the right? He was trying to drive away. He was trying to steer, like it would go forward. But then he was trying to steer and I don't know what that makes steer work. You know? I was like, you know, he seemed okay. But then thinking about it,
Maybe we need a snack for George to go more comments, because he had to eat.
You can order pizza? Yeah, that would be a board meeting. Taco Bell? I guess I'm big here. It's actually healthier to show something like once a week. We're not as all the well, we'll come to this here. Dr. Sally? Dr. Sale? We just like said it and then I tried to get it. All right, thank you everyone for that break. We'll go ahead and we'll resume our report item and we'll go with questions from the board. Mr. Neely?
Thanks, sir. First of all, Dr. Washer, Dr. Salas, Dr. Sales, thank you guys so much for bringing this forward. Okay, this is what I've been wanting to talk about for some time now, and for one reason, well, for many reasons, we haven't been able to, and I get that. But so this is great, and also, you guys put a lot of work into this. This is pretty much a blueprint of how education looks at fixing this achievement gap. I recommend, I support this, but let's face it, this hasn't worked yet. Okay, and not just here, it hasn't worked anywhere yet. Okay, because the problem with our economically disadvantaged students and families is much greater than what we do at the school site. You guys have got that covered. This is great, and I totally said this is what we need to go for. But we've got to go a little bit further, and what we've got to do is we've got to take care of those families. They have bigger issues than just having their kids in school. We only have them for, like Mr. Heavily, he and I have talked about this many times over the years. We've only got them for several hours a day. How can we expect to change anything? Well, because we need to have them longer. We need to have families more involved. Look, I think I'm kind of guessing everyone's familiar with Maslow and the hierarchy of needs and that kind of thing. Well, we've got some of our families are down in that lowest tier yet. They're still fighting for as Maslow puts it, what's it, food, water, warmth, and rest. They're still trying to satisfy those needs. And you know, Maslow says, and I don't agree with everything he's done, but I agree with some of this, is that you've got to satisfy those bottom needs before you can move up to the whole self-actualization thing. You know, so we need to help our families do that. And I'm convinced it's not because they don't want to, they don't know how. And some of this stuff is pretty scary. Now, some of the things that, and I've made a couple of meetings with some organizations here in the county, and there is help that we can bring to these families. Okay, we're talking about housing help. When you've got 3 families living in a 3-bedroom, 1-bath apartment, all the kids are sleeping in 1 bedroom, it's tough. It's tough to find a place to study. So maybe we provide additional time for study at our schools. Maybe years ago I suggested, well, before we ever got computers, we had the computers we had computer labs. You all remember that? We had computer labs. I suggested these things are sitting empty at night. Why don't we open them up and allow our families to? Well, we never quite got there. You know? But there are other places too that we can do this. We can bring in community members to help with tutoring at night, or whatever. There's so many ways we can do this. So we need housing, we need food, medical care. You know, we need to be able to help our families apply for medical care that is available to them. Dental care, we talked a little bit about that. Dr. Seance talked a little bit about that. I know my dentist, Dr. Rommel Ball, she participates in a program for schools where they go into schools and they give free dental care to kids. We need to have that going on. Legal assistance and protection, those two things go hand in hand. Mr. Freitas' department there at the district attorney's office actually has a branch that has a place for families to go in to get away and get out of abusive relationships. There's a great deal of help that's available there, but a lot of our families don't know about that. So that's the kind of thing that we need to do. I know that our libraries, Lodi Library, has been wanting to work with us on literacy programs. I'm sorry I laugh about this because it happened several years ago. They offered, that they wanted to use one of our classrooms to help the community, and we wanted to charge them for it. Well, let's get over that. Let's develop a plan where we're working with everybody. Another part of this is adult education and English language training for our parents so that they can be involved and help their kids. So these are all things that we need to do. Several different, matter of fact, we all got an email, I believe we all did, from one of the organizations, and listen, all of the county agencies work with us, so we need to get involved in that. Now, I strongly support reinstating, I guess I should say, the director for elementary education. That's the person that ought to be tasked with developing and implementing this and getting it going. And I understand you've got focus schools. I've supported focus schools in the past. I support them a little bit less now that there is this influx of money. Before, I was all the focus schools because we had very limited funds. We've got some money now, right? Let's use it. In business, we always say it's all about the timing. The timing is right now. We can do this, okay? We can actually make a difference. And it's got to be more than what we usually do. We can look for support from universities, from some of our teaching universities. We've got Stanislaw Davis, UOP, what?
The Teachers College.
Teachers College. What's the other? Oh, Humphreys has a teachers program too. We should get involved with all of it. Anytime we can get people to come in and help our kids, and we need to pay for the fingerprints too, by the way, okay? And the background check. We need to take care of that so they can just come in here and work with our kids, all right? But you're gonna need somebody, a person to head this thing up. Because we're talking a lot of additional work, a lot. And if you guys do it, something else is gonna go by the wayside. So we need to get that position reinstated. This is it. This is the point we can make this happen. I'd like to see what we can come up with as far as helping families, because that's where it's going to change. And that's all I've got on this for right now, but I don't want to drop this. I want to see this come back. I know what it was, Dr. Walsh, I want to say also is that I like your idea of giving schools leeway and choice to do this. But I think that needs to be coupled with guidance as well. All right, we've got to do both. I actually have had a couple of people tell me that they have too much leeway. I mean, I found that hard to believe, but we need to give them some leeway, but that needs to be accompanied with some guidance of what we expect. Okay? And sharing of ideas, and you may want to get some principals together. I'm sure you've got a Title I Principal Council, right? We do, right? Okay. We need to get them involved. We also, I love the idea of the additional FTE to the Title I schools, because I've also talked to a principal that actually left being a principal of a Title I school because it was just too much work. So we need to back that up. And Title I schools, by and large, have a more of a discipline issue. All right, so we need to work on that. Now, I'm talking about elementary schools. And why am I talking about that? Is because if we can get those kids interested in school, then we can change what happens at the secondary level. 10.5 years of sitting on the board and reviewing expulsion packets, I can count on one hand the number of students who have had good grades that we've expelled. Kids that get expelled from school always have very, very poor grades. We also need to take a look at our chronic absenteeism. And we need to look at that as to why that is. Why do we have a chronic absentee problem? And how are we going to mitigate the impact of that chronic absenteeism? That's a lot of work to be done. Right now we got summer break, so guess what? Now's the time to do it. Now, I know we can't get it all implemented immediately, but let's start on it. Let's start getting something done. You have your hand up. Did you have a, Dr. Sales?
Oh, no.
Okay, I thought maybe you were going to ask me a question on that. Okay, I'd be happy to answer, to talk to anybody about this. By the way, this is not new. This is not something that I came up with. All right? Santa Ana is actually doing something really similar to this program, and they've enjoyed some great success with it. I went to a seminar put on by CSBA that they did, and it's phenomenal. They have medical centers at each one of their schools. So we can do this, okay? It's different than what we've done in the past, but we can do this. One more thing, but let's look at what happened with QUIA. You remember QUIA schools? You know, I think we had 5 of them, right? And toward the end of that, I went back and I did the research on what impact QUIA had. Now, for those of you who don't know, we got extra money because of a lawsuit by CTA with the state, as I remember. Isn't that right? Yeah. And So certain schools were picked out, and we had 5 of them. I don't remember all the names. I know Oakwood was one of them because I taught there. Okay, and they, at 5 schools, we had 2 of them when scores went up. 1 remained the same, and 2 went down. So it's not just the money. It's what you're doing. We tried the whole thing about extra training, extra technology, everything, and that was good, but that's not enough. You go up a point or 2 points, but it's not enough. We need major changes. I told you last time that we have a 25-point achievement gap between those who are economically disadvantaged and those who are not economically disadvantaged. 25-point achievement gap. That's what we need to work on. And that's it for right now.
And Mr. Neely, I think you officially went longer than the presentation. So.
Thanks, sir.
But your passion is very much appreciated, and especially being a driving force on this. So, other comments from the board? Mr. Nava.
Yes. You know, great report. Everything in writing is great. I'm an experienced guy. Raphael, you mentioned dentist. I was 18 years old when I went to the first dentist. 23 cavities. I came from a family that they didn't speak, my parents never spoke English, okay? They did support education. And that's the key to the whole thing that we're gonna do here. We need to make aware of these parents to support their kids in education. Whenever you get into the business of coming in December and all these people leave to Mexico, that's a no-no to me. That's a none. No, don't do that. We're defeating the whole purpose of educating these kids when they go over there and you try to put them online and all that. It's not the same. Stay here and provide for them. I know there's hardships. I know the whole hardships. I never got a newspaper in my house. That's what I'm telling you. Library was the first place I went to get a newspaper. No books in the house. And these are from experiences. Those families have to be aware to support education. A lot of them are very, very poor. They're in the fields, just like mine were in the fields. And you need to ask them a question. They're okay. You're doing okay. Go ahead, just go to school. That's not progress to me. It was on my own volition that I went and go ahead and start exploring things, And then when I learned how to read, that's what you people have to teach those guys how to read. The whole world experience things in your mind. A lot of knowledge came there. I couldn't lay a book down. My mom would tell me, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, in Spanish. And I've been reading that book because I was so confident about getting the education. The parents are important. Okay, now I'm talking about the Hispanics only now. Let's go to the black population. We've got to support those people. Most of those youngsters come from a single parent. Almost 75% of them do come from a single parent. And what happens when they get home? If it's a male, he runs the show. I know I've been in the schools before. I've been in Edison High School, I've been at Franklin, and in Stockton Unified, and I know what happens. We, as teachers, you take care of them. That's what they used to tell me. You take care of this guy. I don't want to go as long as George, but I'm telling you that it's just touching to me that this is what's going to have to be done. All the writing that we have there, and we got to do these programs and all that. The principals of that school know what's happening at that school. They know exactly. And if they implement the things they do, bring the parents in. I visit Oakwood. They have a coalition of parents in there. Principal invited me to come and check. And he says, well, I'm going to just have coffee with them. No, They were with the laptops and they were studying. There's about 15 Hispanic people in there. Didn't know how to speak, communicated real well because I'm fluent in Spanish. So we communicated. And they asked, Mr. Nava, can we go to adult education? You know, well, hey, that's the start. That's the start for them to learn and to do all these things so they can support their young people. It's such an important factor. It's the parent makeup. Everything that happens in the home, and it's a responsibility of those parents to support these young people to become better people. They're respectful, most of them are, but when they go home, that's it. Everything stops. Nothing goes on unless you have some initiative from somebody to come in that home and set the outfits. With the Asian families, when I was over at Park Lane and Sutherland, went over there to visit, they have tutors that those people are more, the tutors that they have are their brothers and sisters that have been through the school. They tutor their youngsters, their young siblings. And that's how they get through this. There's all kinds of ways to make some plans and reach the goals. So I'm really adamant about the education of the parent. I'm not saying they should be educated, I'm saying they should be aware that this is happening, and then get these people to get into this learning mode of reading and then progressing. When they get to the high school, it's all gone. They don't know how to read by the third grade. They're lost somewhere. Thank you. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Tom. Other comments from the board? Mr. Porter?
Yeah, Mr. Sale, could you answer a couple questions for me? Because I read this document and I'm not as smart as you, so I just need some help. Getting some of these things. You said reading by third grade, and I believe we've hit a home run on that one, haven't we? In terms of test scores last year or year before the pandemic. Didn't we do very well across the board, Dr. Washington?
Don't mind. Mr. Porter, members of the board, we were making great progress in that area. Thank you for recognizing that. Teachers were doing an incredible job focusing on that area, and we were actually looking forward to seeing scores. Right. And then, of course, this happened. So, yes, in our own assessments, we were making a lot of progress. And I have to say, the majority of teachers kept that focus throughout the distance learning.
So that was one area that was a positive, but we don't know where we are right now, of course.
Yes.
And that's understandable. Now, what about comprehension? How are we doing on that? Because my understanding is, and this is just me, doing my weird dive, is that one of the problems with our math is that the kids can't comprehend. They read, but they're having struggling with comprehension. And then the math, of course, is all this Common Core, and the problems are set up, and they can't comprehend what's going on in the math situation. So are we going to measure that as well, Dr. Washer, or somehow?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, UVA is working on some strategies now that we could use for next year. When we talk about reading, we do talk about fluency and comprehension together.
Okay, so that's a combination.
Once you get past that third grade market, the comprehension part becomes much more difficult. Right. And so that's where the scores kind of take a little bit of a dive, because the content is so much more intense and complex.
The vocabulary changes based on the subject matter, is that correct?
Correct.
So, and that would be one of the reasons why the math is so difficult, you think?
Sure, yes, that is one of the reasons, because a lot of the math that is done now in the classrooms is so literature-based, language-based. Gotcha. It's no longer simply the computations and drills. It's the problem-solving, the analyzing, reading a situation and figuring out the mathematics behind it, yes.
Right, okay, thank you for that. And then my next question, sorry, Dr. Washer answered it.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you, Dr.
When you say social emotional learning, okay, I get it. I understand the term. How do you measure it?
So there's a universal screener that we implement 3 times a year.
Okay, and I hate to interrupt you because I do that a lot.
Yeah.
And it's rude by me. When you say a screener, what does that do?
So it's a student survey, and we actually implemented that for the first time this fourth quarter. Per board direction, we implemented that district-wide. And it's a student survey, and it measures 6 areas related to social emotional learning health. And based on those results, students are given a rubric scale score, and then it tells you.
Give me an example of the questions. I'm sorry I interrupted you again, that's being rude. When you say we had 4 categories of questions.
Yeah, so for example, one of the areas is grit. So it'll ask you something like, how do you feel about completing assignments? Are you able to complete assignments, thoroughly on a regular basis? And then you rate the students respond on a Likert scale.
So you're getting some type of accumulation of information based on how they handle academics.
Right. And this is a
Does it go outside that, like behavioral, like how are you dealing with your home life? How are you dealing with social interactions? Do we go outside that as well? I just
yeah, so the 6 areas do cover that, and we're happy to share the survey questions that were submitted to all students. But yes, it does measure a variety of social emotional learning.
Okay, very good. That helps me understand when you say those things.
Sure.
Now, you talk about learning loss, which of course everybody will be talking about in the up and coming 21-22 year. Hopefully we don't have any more pandemic issues. But what do you mean, how are we going to measure that since we really haven't been able to test accurately? We did pre-pandemic, but during the pandemic everything was, we talked about the SBAC, but even that, I don't know how much buy-in we got, and that was understandable. I'm just curious, how are we going to measure that? I don't know who can answer that for me.
So we're looking at reinstating, I would say, pre-pandemic benchmark assessments.
Okay.
We can compare, we'll have to compare a 2-year gap.
Right.
The 3rd graders 2 years ago versus the 3rd graders next fall, for example.
Right.
Because, there's, the SBAC is, you can't compare, it's a different test.
Right. Now, on your benchmarks, are they going to be new teacher collaborated ones? Are they going to be?
No, we were going to attempt to implement we call it a pilot benchmark last year, and that with COVID hit, it didn't work. We were trying to scale it down a little bit, but I think at this point it's best just to go back to the prescribed benchmarks we used 2 years back, which were they weren't as fine-tuned as we were trying to. What we're trying to do is make it less time-consuming, but still valid.
Right.
But at this point, I think we have a tool that works, so we're going to use that tool to start the year.
I don't know, Mr. Sandstrom, the benchmarks at the high school level, aren't those mostly online now? The answers?
Yes, almost all of them are now.
The answers are all online?
So that's one of the challenges.
That's one of the challenges we have. And you guys are aware of that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And at the early grades, we also have Amplify Dibbles, which is a universal screener for early literacy. So teachers administer that 3 times a year just to see how students are doing in developing their phonics skills.
So for early literacy, we do have good data from the COVID year, actually, to compare next year with.
Yeah. What about kids who come in at the high school level that are literacy deficient or middle school? What are we going to be doing? How are you going to measure this?
Well, if their test results from prior sites and schooling show that they're struggling, they would get an intervention class.
So we have channels for them to go in. Right. Okay, very good. And then my last question, and this came up earlier today, and I'm sorry that I don't understand it completely, but I was on the verge of retirement. Pbis. Could you explain that to me at the high school level? Because I understand it's restorative behavior, is that correct? Am I using the wrong term?
It's positive behavior, instructional support, or intervention
the
support.
The acronyms I get lost on, I'm sorry.
Positive behavior, and so this actually initiated, to my understanding, several years back. Enrique was coordinator at the time, and Joe Ward was the coach initially, and trying to help the school staff through training, working with de-escalating issues and helping students to channel their energies. again, a positive aspect rather than a negative consequence. Not that, behavior wants to be rewarded, but trying to find positive venues or actions rather than a student who's struggling and they just act out
Right.
in a negative manner.
Now, how's the data on that? Is that successful? We've never seen any data up here as a board. I was just curious.
Yeah, I don't know that there's clear data in our ranks here, but the Pbis has been around for several years.
Right.
Initiated up in Washington, and the data from the organization shows positive outcome for positive behavior.
Yeah. My last question. I'm sorry to take so much of your time. First of all, I want to
You
thank
mean your second last question?
My second to last question. I want to thank Dr. Washer and the both of you for your work on this. But my last question is under your additional supports for focus schools. And I noticed your first bullet there, provide administrative coaching to site principals to assist in planning staff development. Who would that be?
Well, that would be, it's to be identified. A couple years back, there was an effort to work with the principals, and not just at these schools, with a consultant. Unfortunately, that consultant passed away at mid-year, and then COVID hit. So that sort of stalled that effort. But it could potentially be a retired administrator from a district, ours or another district. There are consultants who do this work. Generally, they're former administrators, sometimes former superintendents and such. And they, I have experience in Stockton. We brought in a former principal and superintendent who did just coaching of administrators. And I can tell you the feedback from about 8-9 of those school principals. They found it the most valuable training they received, quote, on the job for their roles.
Veteran administrators, and then we bring them in to shadow our principals?
Well, they could do group type professional development or potentially one-on-one.
Okay. And then, okay, that's it for me. I was going to ask another question.
No, go ahead.
I would have
No,
thought
I
I
would-
was Freitas' trap. Thank you very much. I'll let some other board
No,
members.
go on.
No, Mr. Freitas, I want to make sure that you're full of PBIS.
We have this running joke in the courthouse that
No, it's
the lawyer
okay.
says, I only have one more question, of course, and then asks 6.
But we're in a courthouse, so you're right. I would let
Or-
somebody else do it.
Very good. Any
Thank you
other?
very much.
Thank you. Vice President McFarland.
Before everyone falls asleep here. First, I'd like to say I like the.
Thank you.
Just kidding. The director and the coordinator, I back those. I want to make sure that we have proper staff. I know that we're asking a lot of our schools, and that creates a lot of work for both of our assistant superintendents and the cabinet. So I want to make sure, before we add those positions, that we have proper staff. That part makes me a little concerned. So I see those numbers, and I want to make sure that we have not just some clerical staff added, but that we have ample clerical staff in our sites. The second question that I have, or point that I have, is I like the oversight on the schools with the different programs, and letting the schools choose what best suits them. What I would like to see is some baselines. Not being an educator, but I know that if you have some parameters in there, that schools are treated equally. That even within our Title I, if it works at one school, it doesn't mean it might not work, but then they start comparing and somebody feels that one got more than the other. So I want to make sure that we have some baselines in there, and that they also have the staff to implement what they're doing. I mean, I think we can throw a lot of money at these sites, but if they don't have the proper staffing to do it, I'm concerned about that. Pbis is my next kind of point. Well, I think I hear from different teachers that it works well. My concern is that while a student is in the early stages of, say, the first tier, I guess you would say, well, they have their get plan. Within 24 hours, they break the plan, and there's so many days. So do we have enough staff to guide the students through Pbis, and are we noticing, are we tracking where our breakdown is within Pbis? I think the program in theory sounds fantastic, but I'm concerned that we're breaking down in different between Tier 1 and Tier 2, and then Tier 2 and Tier 3.
So the training that's occurred generally at the site so far is for what we would call first tier. It'd be teacher supports, how to help the teachers work with those. What you're getting to is more along the lines of the stages when the students either behavior turns dramatically in a short time period, or just simply gets to a higher level over time. And as we alluded to in the plan, our counselors do a fabulous job. The counselors aren't necessarily trained to deal with the most serious behavioral challenges, and to Mr. Neely's point too, some of the family-related issues. So we're proposing that we look into other positions that aren't necessarily a counselor, but a licensed or a certificated type of a role. Folks who are trained specifically in working not just on behavior per se, but they do know how to work with serious behavior and also how to sort of work with the whole child, including the family. So I think that would be very helpful. But Pbis is really for the 1 and 2 layer of support. My understanding what's taken place so far in most of our sites is supporting teachers and helping manage their environments.
I guess my point is that while we're in tier 1, and that's where probably most of our students would fall, that we're not too busy writing and giving verbal recommendations that we're missing when the child escalates in the second period or the third period or halfway through the next day, and we can't really put it into motion. Those are the concerns that I've heard.
And I know, just adding to what Dr. Solly shared, with Pbis, the intent is to teach students appropriate behavior in the settings that they encounter throughout their day. So we teach kids how they're supposed to behave in the cafeteria. We teach kids how they're supposed to behave out on the playground. And we set expectations for each of those common areas. And for the majority of kids, you set up some sort of token economy or just, give them encouragement, and they're going to be able to meet behavior expectations in all the common areas and be okay. Then, with the tier 2 and tier 3 students, what happens is these students need additional support. The token economy doesn't motivate them, so you need to set up other structures in place in order to meet their behavior needs. And you either shorten the time frame, where they can meet the behavior expectations, or you slightly modify their behavior expectations for a short amount of time.
Thank you. I guess my question would be is, do we have any data of how it's working? I mean, any hardcore, I know this last year, obviously, we don't have anything current, but I would be curious to see it.
We did look at discipline data at one point. We can try to pull that. I know that we did look at that.
Moving forward.
That incidents had gone down, so we did have that. Just as a quick example, something that a lot of schools are doing as a result of their focus on trying to connect kids to school and be positive with kids and help them learn behaviors is the check-in, check-out. And I'm sure you've probably heard about that, where some students who need extra support have an adult at school where they go to in the morning before they start their day to get encouragement, and they check out with them. They go meet up with them before they go home. So they're starting and ending their day on a positive note with an adult who cares about them and who is focused on them. And our sites are reporting that has made a huge difference with children who would otherwise be very disconnected and therefore have negative behaviors.
I have heard that from sites also. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the board?
Yep.
Mr. Everly?
Thank you. I see the district-wide and Title I division in your report. My question is there are there any plans to expand to other Title I schools and or to non-Title I schools?
In particular, which service are you thinking? Any?
The whole gamut that you list for. If you're listing it for a Title I school, I want to know if that can be expanded to other schools and to non-Title I schools. Because obviously if it's going to work at one school, it's probably, there's a component in there somewhere that will help the other schools. And just because they don't have that magic number doesn't mean that there aren't Title I students at that school site.
Mr. Hebley, members of the board, one thing that has come up from our school staff, our school site folks, is administrative support at the schools. We have heard from non-Title I schools that have similar issues that you're describing, who may not have a VP And that is very difficult, or who may have a half-time VP, just because they're not Title I, or like you say, they're 10 kids below the number to get another, to get more support. So those are things that we could expand to other schools too, is that the support staff, whether it's a VP or counseling time, community liaison time, those extra services.
And I think taking Dr. Sayos' analogy, all schools would have tooth decay, but like Mr. Neely's pointing out, we got 25 times higher tooth decay in some schools.
And my point is not ignoring the other schools that have tooth decay.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. So the percentage, if it's good for one student, it's good for all. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's kind of my question is this going to plan to expand, or are we keeping it to 4 schools?
In the short term, we do have some flexibility with the additional ESSER funding. As Dr. Solly mentioned earlier, we are going to be coming to the board in September for approval of an expenditure plan for ESSER 3, otherwise known as ARP. It can support, yeah, I know, ARP. So with the American Rescue Plan, it's $70 million that we have to provide academic supports at all of our school sites. The ESSER funding is not tied to low-income schools. We could provide supports district-wide. So, you know, between now and September, we're certainly open to hearing input from the board on how to provide additional supports at all of our schools.
And that's kind of what I was alluding to, is how can that go farther? And Dr. Washer, I heard the same things about administrative help and especially counseling help. So that is part of my question, is how can that be expanded? Dr. Sullivan, you look like you have something.
So, yeah, so the short-term benefit we have until 2024 with this funding is to do some of those services at all sites, provided it's within the parameters of that funding. We do have some flexibility, though, back to the Title I question, in setting our Title I threshold. The issue is, though, we don't get additional Title I funding, we just spread it around farther. So we could make some adjustments to the Title I school list, but each site would be impacted proportionally.
Yeah, but some would be impacted in a positive way.
Correct.
Supporting what you're talking about. I was talking about a 25-point achievement gap in both math and language arts. That is not school specific. That is all economically disadvantaged and all not economically disadvantaged. It's exactly what you're saying. There's some schools that are at like 72% that are not on Title I, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, you answered that part of it. The last thing is, I kind of like, obviously, I like where we were going with reading by the 3rd grade. Okay? And I think we should obviously keep that push going. And whether we need to come up with other methods of doing it or support the methods that we currently have, yeah, we got to keep going on that. Also, one of the things I bring up a lot is math. And I did see kind of some things alluding to math, but math is pretty bad. In the state of California, we're not by any means the only district that's having a problem with math with their students. And I think we'll find that Common Core math is not going to be the panacea that everybody thinks it is. Matter of fact, I think it's doing our kids, it's really turning off a lot of kids into math. Just saying. So within that, I would like to suggest, if there's a way that we can keep math in the forefront also, I think that'd be really helpful because math is absolutely one of those key things that determines the kid's success. Last thing, kindergarten. There, right now, contractually, and I don't understand the whole thing, if a site votes that they want to go extended day kindergarten or all day kindergarten, whatever the term is, that could be arranged and allowed through the contract system as long as there's facilities. So, you know, we're talking about giving these kids some extra time, and that extra time could be for reading it. So I think that would be something valid to at least look at, because I know some schools too that I can think of offhand that actually voted to have extended kindergarten. Of course, not the COVID year, the year before. And they were told no because there was no space. I mean, space is a real thing, so I get it. But if there's something we can do for space, then maybe that would give us a good bang for a buck that would keep kids at school a little bit longer with the approval of that school site's teachers, and do it that way. So.
Thank you, Mr. Everly. Other comments from the board?
Just one, and that is the name of this thing is the School Improvement Plan, and I think plan is the most important part of this word. And hopefully, I think you have a lot of suggestions that help you implement the plan. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments from the public?
Thank you, President Freitas. Thank you, Dr. Solly and Dr. Seha on this plan and some of the things outlined on that are there. We would ask some questions in going forward with the plan that we'd like to see, and like some of the questions that were mentioned, going back to QIA, the Quality Education Act, and this, we saw that there was a difference in some of the smaller class sizes. Book rooms, checkout systems for kids to take home materials. Because of that smaller class sizes, there were closer relationships many times with families for those wrapped around services that are so vital. I remember we used to have in a little part of a classroom a dentist that would visit every so often, so that we offered those services, and the community liaisons and the bilingual aides would help set up those appointments. They'd help set up vision appointments. Sometimes when translation would help, our community liaisons would help translate at those appointments and doctor's appointments. So we really like the idea of this being site-based decisions. We would ask that whole school, and not just limited to school site councils, but all those stakeholders that are involved at the school, all those ideas, not just a small group of teachers. We'd like to see everyone being part of that decision-making process. You know, I'll throw my school under the bus. We one year voted for a longer school day. It violated the contract. It was not approved as a site MOU that was mentioned, but we saw the importance of it, so we did extended day activities to help bridge that gap. We agree that the reading by third grade is important. However, as some of you have mentioned, some of those interventions and the limiting of 6 new teachers to those 6 sites is an issue. And as you ask most Title I schools, their entire budget, if they have an intervention teacher, is their whole budget. And we know with the Title I funds that part of the Title I funds are taken off the top to help other non-Title I schools, because they have Title I kids there to help pay for part of an intervention person. So in making these decisions at what's best for their site, we really would like to see empowerment of teachers, but also empowerment of our LPPA and CSEA members, our preschool teachers that are many times left out of the conversation. Our TK teachers sometimes are left out of the conversation at staff meetings and training. We'd like to see nurses and speech therapists and our counselors. We know they're vital, important people, and before we outsource, gosh, give them the training to help. I don't know how many times teachers have said, parents will not sign that form for an outside person. But if I say, hey, do you mind if Johnny sees Ms. Contreras, our counselor, about this issue? Whether there's been somebody who's been imprisoned, whether somebody has recently got a divorce, whether there's a recent death in the family, those people are connected because they have a relationship on site. And so those wraparound services on site are vitally important. So on some of the budgetary items, I think we might need to look at more money for training some of our people. I'm not sure that I got the acronym. I tried to type somebody. We know we do not have a BSBN, and I'm looking, Mr. Warren's not here. We outsource that because we don't have somebody qualified and trained in that. And they work with training both the adults and the students on certain behaviors. So really empowering and getting all the stakeholders together for the site plan is important. I think it's also key, and you've heard LPPA come up here and talk about their case ratios. I don't know how many times I asked the nurse or my counselor, could you contact one to talk about this? Well, if they have 700 on their caseload, it's harder for them to make those phone calls. So looking at their caseloads and reducing those would be very powerful at school sites. Also, the number of community liaisons that we have, and I know there may be needs to be shifting for languages at school sites, but we really think that those kinds of things need to be expanded upon on this plan. And I really think empowering the school sites, I believe it was Ms. McFarland that said every school is not the same, and what works here doesn't necessarily work here. So ask those teachers, have those roundtable discussions. I remember having many a CUIA meeting when we had outside evaluators asking us the hard conversations, and Dr. Washer was there in a room of 50 people sitting in our library and saying, what do we need to do? What is it? We may not like to do it, but this is the work we have to do in making a commitment. So making sure your stakeholders are on board with what the plan is to go forward, not just a small group. That's important that we empower them. I'd love to see a task force kind of come out and really hone that. The coaching for principals. I'm concerned. We lost a lot of elementary principals. And so that coaching piece is going to be big. In that aspect, RBET, we have master model and teacher specialists now that could do some of this training. I'd love to see part of that in this plan, and maybe I'm overstretching, but I think those use our internal people to help us strengthen what we can do for students. We also need to make sure that all schools get access to making sure every third grader is reading by third grade. That means the earlier we reach them, the better. So including our Head Start, state, and TK teachers in the conversation is key. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the public? Dr. Washer, what a presentation. What I'm really impressed is that it's so multifaceted, that we talk about many different ideas, that we go from philosophy to actual hands-on, that we talk about administration all the way to boots on the ground. And this is a rethinking. And this board's going to be setting goals here in the near future. So I would ask that maybe as part of our starting point, a transcript be prepared of this conversation's presentation tonight, because of the ideas that were shared, that they just don't disappear into digital land, that we have them in black and white, and that we use this for our conversations going forward. And I move this on. So and I think there's services that should be able to accomplish that, and that we, I don't know where we do that, if we email it to ourselves, but I know that would be helpful for me, because the ideas that were discussed here tonight by all involved were, I thought, very, very helpful, and I think would be beneficial.
Thank you. Mr. Freitas, members of the board, one thing that we do want to touch base with you on tonight regarding this plan is your comfort level with moving forward with some of these things, or bringing it back to you at another time for further discussion. The key things being personnel items. With timeline and getting things posted and people hired, hopefully before school starts or shortly thereafter, timing is of a critical nature. So I don't know what your thoughts are on things like vice principals, the additional 1 FTE at middle school and a couple at elementary school. We do have educators posted. We talked to you about that before. We do have intervention teachers posted. We have talked to you about that before based on previous grant discussions. But these other issues in the Director of Elementary Ed, these are things we're bringing to you again, kind of refreshed. So just trying to gauge where you are on those personnel items. Are you comfortable with us moving forward? Or do you prefer that we bring back for further discussion, which would be probably in July?
So I imagine the board likes all these ideas. Of course, the question is, how do we pay for this?
Well, we have funding through 24. I want to say in our hot little hands, but coming shortly in hand. It would be the ongoing nature of things that we would have to sustain, or attrition or other kinds of things to reduce the services at some point. But for now, we have funds to increase services. I know that may not be comfortable, using one-time money for ongoing costs. We learned early on that that's not the best plan, but that's what this money is for, is to provide additional services to children. So we're kind of in this catch-22 with that.
Well, you got my vote then. Three other votes from the board? Mr. Neely? Yes, yes, yes. Yes.
I think his support. Yeah, I might like to add though that I'd like to have staff, you folks, itemize what you think is most important and what's actually doable. Pie in the sky is great if you have unlimited resources, but I haven't heard that we've had that yet. So I really would like to, I'm all for it, but let's be realistic and you tell us what you need the most and what we can get the most out of. Get the most bang for our buck.
I think Dr. Washer is saying we have unlimited resources for 3 years.
Oh, yeah, well.
Or at least extensive resources.
and then after that, not so much, maybe. So.
Yeah, just before we close it out, it's okay. You won't make it to Hawaii. I like this plan. I like what you're doing. I would like to see this board. I know that we have reading by 3rd grade as a goal, and I think that's a great goal. I'd like to see the board, not you people, digest this and give our go-ahead tonight and come up with some goals that we feel are in this that we can pull out in a broad brush way. Meaning, here's what we see, what we envision we'd like you to do, taking what you have, and go ahead and implement. And realizing that each site has their own clientele, they bring their own lunch pail, which might be a little bit different. We have to work at it a little bit differently. But we should have some goals by this board that you could follow, that would give you direction, and it wouldn't be so you're like coming here with this great plan, and you're going, well, what are they going to do? So I think the board needs to provide more direction, in addition to what you have here today, on large goals that we'd like to see accomplished, like reading at 3rd grade. Taking that from your information they have. That's my personal opinion. We need to provide goals you can see that are attainable and go from there.
A lot to be said about that. What gets measured gets fixed. So,
Correct.
Real quick.
and Dr. Sully's nodding his head. So,
I just, the reading by 3rd grade is a fabulous goal. And actually, when you boil it down, though, per standard, students should be reading by the end of 1st grade. That's when we reach success. The reason that 3rd grade is bantered about so much is that there's strong research saying that that's a critical tipping point. So, not to set the bar too high, but ideally our goal is reading by the end of 1st grade. In order to prevent other catastrophes from happening, 3rd grade goal is a fantastic goal.
So we have a 1st grade goal now, and the board can give you some more. How's that sound? Based on your plan. So I think you have consensus, Mr. Free.
very good, Dr. Washer. Is that the guidance you need? And Vice President McFarland, will wrap it up.
Sure. I'm behind all of it. I'm a yes vote. One of my concerns is that the public is going to say to us, oh, you have money for an assistant director, but why aren't you doing this? So I want it real clear that we are aware of the money that we are spending and where it's coming from, and that we're not taking away, or we're not hiring a custodian, or we're not hiring an assistant secretary to a principal that is desperately needed on different sites, because we are spending all of our money in this avenue. And I think that's important to make it abundantly clear that we're not just adding positions because we're getting one-time money.
Thank you, and also because what we do has to meet the requirements of the funding source. So some of those things that you mentioned wouldn't meet those requirements.
Correct. Well, I tried to make that abundantly clear at the last meeting, but that didn't really get out.
We're extending the school year?
What?
Very good.
Thank you.
Dr. Sally, Dr. Sayah, Erwin, Dr. Washer, thank you very much for this presentation. And we look forward to seeing what you're going to do with it. Very nice. All right. Moving on with communications. We have communications from employee group representatives.
Thank you again. Summer school has started, and teachers have been at work for a second week with students, and seeing exciting things happening on campuses and things working out. Lots of change. I want to thank you for listening at the last board meeting and giving direction after the board meeting in closed session with regards to the per diem rate. That was much appreciated, and that issue has been resolved, and we are moving on, and people are happy with being with their students on sites. We appreciate that quick action you took at the last meeting. Just as follow-up to the last report item, to make sure that we're clear, we would like to see less increases in administration, more increases in training and intervention, more into student ratios to the adult and special services being reduced, so there's more one-to-one contact with students. Leah would also like to congratulate Savannah Heed from Lodi High School, who graduated, oh my gosh, 2 weeks ago, and for winning the LEA scholarship of $1,000 to pursue her education and one day becoming a teacher. Thank you all very much for your time tonight, and have a great July.
Thank you.
It'll be a while before we see each other.
Good evening, President Pbis, members of the board, and Dr. Kathy Washer. My name is Randy Cordovis, and I'm the president for Chapter 77 CACA for Lodi District. So what I have here is that the board provides direction to the superintendent and management staff in regard to their labor relations with CSEA. It is the board decision tonight to extend the contracts of the CBO and superintendent while providing an approximately 10,000 yearly increase to the superintendent wages and nearly that amount to the CBO. While I am sure that the board can justify these increases to the public and staff, there is no justification for compensating hundreds of our members at or below the minimum wage and refusing to compensate them enough to be able to afford health insurance so they can provide for their families. In fact, we have met with the CBO and has informed us that it is impossible to provide affordable employer contributions to our members, even though we have bargained for these funds. And that had them applied to our members' district budgeted accounts. We have one more scheduled meeting with our representatives in contract negotiations. Rather than stashing $40 million in a phony declining enrollment reserve account, we think it would be wise to compensate their employees enough that they do not have to depend on public assistance for the insurance and rent. These employees are watching you and listen. We hope that you will watch and listen to them as well. Respectfully, and thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Any other comments from bargaining groups? Comments from board members? All right. Mr. Porter.
I have another question. Anyway. I would like to see, as I mentioned earlier, this board become, and it is, I love Mr. Neely's passion to try to help all students, especially those that are very needy. And I celebrate with him those same concerns. I'd like to see more data presented to us so that we can make more informed decisions. And again, with COVID, that's different. I also am concerned, and I'm concerned about the wages of our employees. I feel that, and this is just me, my opinion, 38 years of teaching, 2 years on the board, I've never seen morale so bad among our employees. And money does make a difference. You have to be able to put food on the table. You have to be able to take care of your kids. You have to have decent health care. And the idea that we have some employees that are looking at going in and out for jobs or McDonald's or things like that we cannot get wages above that level, I find quite shocking. The same thing goes with first, second year teachers that are taking on jobs as Uber Eats and things of that nature after attaining their degrees, maybe even their masters. I just find that really difficult to swallow. I have a son at home that just got his master's in engineering. He's doing remote work, and his salary is significant. And he's just been working for 5 months. 26 years old, almost double what a first-year teacher would make. Still living with me because he's got bank. Now, my point in this is we have to keep up. We have to keep drawing in the best. If we need more custodians, pay more. Need more bus drivers, pay more. If we need to attract new teachers, pay more. We have to keep up, and we're not doing that. So I think that one way that we can get this whole working collaboratively is to make sure that we move forward and look at our salary schedules and try to make them competitive. And I also like to see us work together in a fashion that is respectful and honest and has very transparent dialogue. I think too lately, on both sides, have been filled with rancor, and I'm tired of LEA being the one that has to push the wagon for negotiations. Everybody else settles and they say we want a Me Too, and then LEA has to do everything. They take the heat from the board gets the heat from LEA, and then in the end, LEA has to be the one that makes the final decision for all the employee groups. I struggle with that, because they all should be in it cohesively. So those are my feelings. That's how I feel right now about our district. I think though that I see a bright future. I love the presentation tonight from the individuals that are looking at how we can improve our schools. And I really celebrate Mr. Neely's passion for helping those students that are the most needy to make our school better as a whole. Thank you.
Other comments from the board? All right. We won't be, we have 4th of July coming up. And I wish everyone a safe and safe Independence Day. This is extra special to the Freitas family. Get a little choke up having my grandson in the Navy this year. So, and he just graduated his A school and he moved on to Strands, which is a hand down. He's a Lodi High graduate. Taught him well, and so many great teachers here at Lodi. So wish everyone a wonderful 4th of July, and those are the comments I have. Further comments from the superintendent?
No further comments. Greatly appreciate your conversation about our report item. Thank you.
Okay, Board Advisory Committee, it looks like the Legislative Committee has some meetings set up. And
we need to confirm dates
Well,
with folks.
I need to speak to Chelsea about that because the days, I'm gone some of those days. So I need to first give you the list of when I can make it, and then we need to work on that.
Very good. And then our next meeting. Board, I asked staff to kind of load us up tonight and cover about as much as possible. And we ran a little bit longer than I like because our agenda is cleared for July. And historically, we have not had meetings in July, but we scheduled one this year. So if it is the wishes of the board, we can cancel the July meeting and then use a special meeting.
I move we cancel the July meeting.
Thank you, Mr.
We need to
Connecticut.
have a discussion first.
You don't need to vote because it's not an action item.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Connecticut. Other comments from the board?
Please. Looks like we have two options. Either we could leave it there and cancel it when the time comes, or we can cancel it now and then call a meeting, special meeting when needed. We heard tonight that they're going to be getting things together for hiring positions, and I think that the July 13th meeting, we need to continue because things could come up, which they always do, for the start of school and prepping for that. That's just my opinion. I don't care what date it is in July, but I think we need to have a meeting in July, my opinion. And if we want to use it as a placeholder, leave it as a placeholder. We don't need it, cancel it.
Other comments from the board?
I agree with Mr. Harold.
Mr. Porter?
I can't imagine starting a new school year and not having a meeting 30 days before. I don't know that the 13th is a date that will work for everybody, but 30 days before the start of school and our board is not convening doesn't make sense to me. However, if it's a light month, then maybe we have a shorter or a different date of a meeting, but I can't imagine not seeing these gentlemen's pretty faces and waiting a whole 6 weeks before we convene.
Flattery will get you a word. Mr. Neely?
Yeah, I don't think
Mr. Nava?
Whatever it takes, whatever
What
it
is
takes.
that?
Doesn't matter. If we need to meet on July, let's meet. We don't? No.
So I think like Mr. Everly, Gary made the motion to get rid of it, so I kind of assume.
There is no motion.
But we can't,
He
it's not an
It's not an
he
agenda
did the
item.
non-motion.
It's consensus, I
Yeah,
guess.
so your consensus is no.
Yeah, my consensus is we don't need to be.
Dr. Washer?
I wouldn't suggest changing the date if we're going to have one in July because it's been posted, it's on our schedule, your approved schedule. So my suggestion would be to keep it, and if we get to a point where it's not necessary, then we can cancel. To have a board meeting, no, don't like to say this, but it's just need a majority. So if folks have other plans or things in the way, as long as we have a majority, we can have a meeting. My suggestion would be to keep it on the schedule and see what it brings at that time.
Okay, so it looks like all I did was create controversy so- and confusion.
We can resolve problems.
My preference really would be just to go ahead and cancel it, call a special meeting, but Dr. Washer, we'll take your advice on this and we will keep the July 13th date. Very good, and then it may be hopefully a shorter meeting than not. But anyway, I do want to point out, and one of the reasons I was thinking about July 13th is this board has worked very, very hard for the very first 6 months of this year. And I'd like to commend all of you for your hard work on this. It's been a pleasure working with you on this. I think we accomplished far more than we ever planned to, and now we're turning a corner with a new school year, and we're looking at the next 6 months and what we want to do. So anyway, thank you, board, and we are adjourned. Yeah.
I'm going over to talk to her. And then, I'm your right. You are.